Welcome back to Commander I Hardly Know, where we take some of the lesser known commanders and try to make them good decks. So far on the show, we've done Impulse Drawing, Widow Guys, and Crimes. But when are you going to make a strong deck, Phil? Today. Today we make a strong deck, with Strong, the Brutish Thespian. Today we're building a mono green commander, and it's not the one that I played on Decked Out. That's right, everyone. I was a guest on Decked Out, and I got to play Shrufus, the Sprout Sire, the first legendary sapperling that you can have in your command zone. How did I do? Only one way to find out. You gotta go check out that episode. It's live on Decked Out right now. Also, if you're learning how to play Commander, Decked Out is the Commander show I recommend watching. I know a lot of you are pretty new to the game because you just came over here because you like me, and hey, thanks. That's the show I watched a lot to learn, and now I got to be a guest on there. So that's really cool. And it supports me because then they'll maybe invite me out again. And I want them to. It was a lot of fun. What's also interesting is that this is secretly the first Marvel card that got printed. You thought those secret layers that got sold out were too bad because you didn't have $40 to spend or like $500 to spend on eBay afterwards? Well, good news. You can buy the Hulk for 50 cents.
He made that so cheap for me, I couldn't help but buy it.
Seriously, look at the card, scratch off the name. You're telling me this isn't the Hulk? It costs 6 mana, that's a lot. But in green, 6 mana is basically 4 mana. You should be ramping. Ward 2 will protect it from removal a bit, or at least make it more expensive for people to hit, and it has the Enrage ability. Lots of different creatures have the Enrage ability. Basically, it means if they take damage, an effect happens. The effect on Strong is it gets 3 +1/+1 counters, and you get 3 rad counters. Isn't that rad? Love it. Radiation makes you mill an amount of cards equal to the number of rad counters you have at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase. Normally you would lose life equal to the number of non-land permanents you milled, but with Strong on the battlefield, you actually end up gaining life. And you're telling me that when they make a Hulk card, they're gonna do better than having an Enrage and Radiation trigger, like Gamma Radiation, on a giant green mutant berserker? I don't think so. Maybe they're not going to bring back the Radiation keyword because it's Fallout specific. I feel like they should be able to do it in multiple sets, especially because people really love the Wise Mothman. And you're not convincing me that's because people love Fallout 76. They don't love that game. Anyway, if you want to play a Hulk or you want to play a Marvel card, we built a Hulk deck. Here you go.
We have a Hulk.
Or if you like Fallout, it's also a Fallout deck. You know, the Fallout. Our strategy is not to go wide today. Our strategy is to go big or go home by making Strong as big as possible, finding a method of trample, and just running shit over. And we're going to do that by starting a fight club.
Welcome to Fight Club.
The fight keyword in Magic the Gathering means one creature deals damage to another creature an opponent controls, but then that creature also deals damage to the creature you chose on your board. It's pretty easy to just look at and do the math that a 7/7 is probably better than whatever dork you're making him fight against, so you can kind of rig the fights in your favor, and boy howdy, do we have a lot of them. You see, after a fight, Strong takes damage, and if Strong is fighting anything power 2 or less, that's not really even damage to Strong that's being dealt this turn. That's just bigger Strong. There are a few things you should watch out for, and by a few things, I mean just Death Touch. Death Touch is the only thing you need to watch out for when you're picking your fighting targets. But otherwise, yeah, 7/7, just swing him in. The first time he fights, he's a 10/10. The second time he fights, he's a 13/13. Not a lot of creatures get bigger than 13/13. Hell, after 3 fights, he can live through a blasphemous act and actually only get stronger. I don't know, like the Hulk getting nuked.
It's like, I was made for this.
So our first fight trigger is going to be on a creature, the Ulvenwald Tracker, letting you pay 2 mana, 1 and a green, to make that creature fight another creature. This is any other creature, not specifically a creature an opponent controls, so if there are no other better targets on the board, you can have Strong beat up the Ulvenwald Tracker. I wouldn't pick a fight with the Hulk, but that's because he's not real, which means that I can confidently say, Bruce Banner, I will see you in the Thunderdome on August 13th of 2025. It's the next Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson, except this time I won't have the advantage because I'm fighting a 60-year-old man. I'll have the advantage because I'm fighting a fictional character. And now it's time for how many sorceries have the word fight on them? The series. Bushwhack, Blizzard Brawl, Curse of the Werefox, Ant's Fury, Epic Confrontation, Longstock Brawl, Malamet Battleglyph, Prey Upon, Ruthless Predation, Savage Punch, Savage Swipe, Smell Fear Proliferates, Then You Fight, Bridgework Battle. And that's it for the sorceries that make it fight. Here's the instants that make it fight. Ancient Animus, Duel for Dominance, Prize Fight, Titanic Brawl, Tail Swipe, Kalani Ambush, and those are all the fights in the deck. It's a lot of fights, because fights are good. Funnily enough, fights are also really, really cheap. I ran this deck for a little bit and had big bombo green spells that cost so much money, like the Great Henge and Doubling Season, stuff like that. And then I kind of figured out those weren't doing a lot for me. You know what would be better? A bunch of 30-cent cards that say target creature you control fights target creature you don't control. And I was right. This has done so much better since I took those big expensive cards out. It also helps us stay under budget.
I doubt it, but you never know.
But hey, big dog, I can't pay for a 6-mana drop commander without some ramp. Can I see the ramp? Yeah, we're getting to it. Number 1, Exploration. Lets you play another land on each of your turns. It's a great thing to get out turn 1, but it actually pays off really great for this later in the deck because of some other things we'll talk about later. Wild Growth makes a land, tap for more land. Emerald Medallion makes green stuff cheaper. Rona's Monument makes green creatures cheaper. Also, it's a trample enabler when creatures enter later, so you can get trample. Hedge Shredder should not cost $1 or less. This card is so good. It's a vehicle, and whenever it attacks, you mill 2 cards. Anytime a land goes into your graveyard from your library, you can put it out tapped. Not just from the mill that the Hedge Shredder does. So I don't know, if your commander was going to make you mill a lot late game, you might just put all your frickin' lands on the board and just have a crazy amount of lands. So, they blew up strong? Okay, I can pay the commander tax and then some. Cultivate lets you search your deck for 2 lands. One of them goes onto the battlefield, one of them goes into your hand. Kodama's Reach does the same thing, but you can splice it into Arcane.
Like that's ever gonna happen.
Rampant Growth puts 1 forest on the battlefield for you. Life from the Loam will help you grab lands you accidentally put in the graveyard, putting 3 of them back into your hand, and it has Dredge 3, which means instead of drawing a card during your draw step, you can mill 3 cards and put Life from the Loam back in your hand, which can put 3 forests into your graveyard that Hedge Shredder either puts out automatically, or you get back from Life of the Loam. You could also mill important cards, but that's not that big of a deal. We'll figure that out later. Lotus Cobra gives you a mana of any color anytime a land hits the battlefield. You have a lot of ways to get more lands in one turn than other people, so that can be a lot of mana. Help ramp you pretty fast while you're ramping by putting extra lands out. It's ramp on ramp. Fyndhorn Elves taps for a green mana. Elvish Mystic taps for a green mana.
He does exactly what I do, but better.
Llanowar Elves taps for a green mana.
He does exactly what I do, but better.
Potato Farmer, you can tap to put a land out onto the battlefield that went into the graveyard this turn, and when a land enters, you can give yourself 2 rad counters, milling cards out and putting them in your graveyard faster so you can get more lands in your graveyard so you can play them with getting lands out of your graveyard cards. Ramunap Excavator lets you play lands from your graveyard for when all those lands are in your graveyard. Walk-in Closet lets you play lands from your graveyard for the lands that are in your graveyard. You can also unlock the Forgotten Cellar, letting you play cards from your graveyard until end of turn and exiling anything that would hit the graveyard that turn. It's 5 mana to do that. You should have a lot of extra mana by the time you're deciding to do that, but it's not exactly my favorite spell in the world. I'm mostly using this for Walk-in Closet, and then that's sort of a redundancy in case you're flooded on mana and don't have anything to spend it on. So let's talk about milling, because I feel like as a new player, I didn't like the concept of milling. I thought it was bad to put cards in my library into my graveyard, but it's good for a couple reasons. 1, there's a lot of cards that pull things out of your graveyard, and that gives you a huge hand, especially those cards that take lands out of your graveyard. There's so many of them. We only put 2 in this deck because it doesn't really need that many more. It needs to fight, but that basically guarantees you don't miss your land drop if you're milling. Also, the card you want in the deck, the card you really, really want to draw, you have very low odds of drawing because there's 100 cards sitting in your deck, or probably like 80 at any given moment, somewhere around there. You have a 1 in 80 chance. That's not good odds. You mill a bunch of cards, you're not as likely to mill the card you need, and then you get more likely to draw the card you need. Think about that. That's math. We're doing math. Green does math. Okay, so with that said, let's mill more, shall we? Patchwork Beastie is a 1-drop. You can start milling cards as soon as it comes out on the next upkeep. It can't attack or block until you have Delirium, but you're gonna have Delirium pretty fast if this boy's on the field. Glowing One is just an additional payoff for the radiation. Harold and Bob, first Newmans, you want to die. It's got Vigilance and Reach, so it's a fantastic blocker, and then when it dies, you can slap that puppy on a land, make that land tap for 3 mana, so it's ramp, and then also get rad counters, so you can start milling. World Shaper will mill you 3 cards every time it attacks. Then, when it dies, you get to put all the lands out from your graveyard onto the battlefield. People aren't going to block this. They don't want it to die. But Ulvenwald's Tracker can make Strong fight this guy, kill him, and then you get all of those juicy lands you've been putting in there. And until that happens, it's dealing 3 damage per turn to one person that you're attacking with it. Aftermath Analyst is similar. It makes you mill 3 cards as it comes in, and then you can pay 4 later to put all the lands from your graveyard onto the battlefield tapped. With how much milling you're going to be doing, it's not entirely unreasonable to assume you could have 5 to 10 lands in your graveyard by the time you activate this. 6 mills 3 cards every time it attacks. I think it should mill 6. I think it should be a 6/6. I think it should cost 6 mana. Whatever. It's also got Reach, so it's a decent blocker. It's not actually all that big. It might die, but the big benefit here is it gives permanent cards in your graveyard retrace, letting you discard a land to cast spells from your graveyard that are permanents. If you've got a way to fish lands out of the graveyard, that's not even a punishment. That's just a really big hand of permanents. You can't use it on instants and sorceries. But to get even more advantage out of that graveyard, let's get spells that take things out of your graveyard. Noxious Revival doesn't even have to cost you any mana. You can just pay 2 life, take a card from your graveyard, put it on the top of your library, so you draw it during your next turn. It's worth noting Patchwork Beastie, that's an optional mill. So you don't have to mill the card, and the milling that happens from radiation happens at the beginning of your pre-combat main phase. So it doesn't happen until after your draw step is done. You don't have to worry about milling it out. Eternal Witness takes a card from your graveyard, puts it in your hand. Timeless Witness does the same thing, but it's more expensive. But also you can eternalize it, meaning that if it's in your graveyard, you can pay 7 mana to make a copy of it to get a card from your graveyard into your hand. But if you're flooded on mana and you just really want to get something out of your graveyard, it's not a bad idea. Cathartic Parting lets you shuffle some cards into your library. It also destroys a target enchantment or artifact. Having enchantment and artifact removal is good. Artifacts and enchantments can cause problems.
Get him out of here.
Get him out of here! Get the out of my...
Praetor's Council puts every card that's in your graveyard into your hand, and you have no maximum hand size for the rest of the game. This is a great finale card towards the end of the game when you have a ton of mana and also hopefully a ton of cards in your graveyard to just sit there with like 40 cards in your hand. That's a good hand. I like having 40 cards in my hand. It makes me feel powerful. All that's great, but what if there were cards that were best in your graveyard and not out on the battlefield? Brawn gives creatures trample when it's in the graveyard and you control a forest. Hey, guess what, mono green player? You're gonna have a forest. Gaia's Blessing is a funky one because when it hits your graveyard from the library, if you milled it, you shuffle your graveyard into your library, which should be a pretty good thing for you to do. Hopefully you're doing a good job of pulling all the basic lands out of there with all your ways to pull the basic lands out of there. And so you're just shuffling all the good permanents and all those good instants and sorceries that make you fight that you wanted to have in your hand back into your library. So you can draw those instead of drawing lands. But you can also play it and shuffle 3 cards from your library into your graveyard, or do that to someone else who's running Reanimator and really screw them over, and draw a card. Drawing cards is good. All that's optional other stuff if Strong doesn't just run people over. So let's make Strong run people over. Swiftfoot Boots will protect Strong even more than that Ward 2 by making him hexproof and giving him haste so he can run people over on the first turn. You do not need haste to make him fight. It is not a tapping ability. So he can fight the first turn, but this just lets him swing in the first turn after he's fought a few people. I actually might recommend when you're playing this deck, don't cast Strong as soon as you can, especially if you don't have Swifties out or a method to do a fight. Because even though he's got Ward 2, when people figure out what you're trying to do with him, they don't like it. They want him gone.
Sometimes patience is the key to victory. Sometimes it leads to very little, and it seems like it's not worth it.
Hardened Scales puts an additional +1/+1 counter on when a +1/+1 counter would go on. So now you're getting 4 +1/+1 counters every time Strong starts a fight. Or I guess you start a fight that Strong finishes. That's how I play Fallout. Branching Evolution doubles the number of +1/+1 counters that would be put on a creature. If you've got Hardened Scales out, you can choose the order in which these happen. So that extra +1/+1 can go on for 4, and then you can double that to 8. 8 is a lot, especially when Strong, a very big creature, starts off at 7. Case of the Trampled Garden lets you put 2 +1/+1 counters out to whoever you want when it comes in, and then it gets solved at your end step if you control a creature with power 8 or greater. If you played this when you have Strong out, he starts out at 7. 7 + 1 is 8. 8 is 8 or greater. When it's solved, whenever a creature you control attacks, you can choose a creature you control to put a +1/+1 counter on and give it trample until end of turn. It's also a trample enabler. And it makes Strong bigger. Power Fist makes it so that whenever a creature you control deals combat damage to a player, they get that many +1/+1 counters. This is for after you have the trample enabled. And it basically guarantees that Strong is going to be blocked by as many things that can possibly block him, which also means he's going to take damage, and he's going to get counters. Or he won't get blocked, he won't take damage, and he'll get counters from Power Fist. You can either get counters or you can get counters. Either way, you're getting counters.
This is my way. This is how I win.
Finally, Fangs of Colonia. You can pay 1 and a green to put a +1/+1 counter on target creature, and then double the number of +1/+1 counters on that creature. Now, you got Branching Evolution out, that's 4 times the +1/+1 counters. And you got Hardened Scales out, that adds another +1/+1 counter that you can then double again. It also has an Overload ability you can pay 5 mana for, but I'm going to be real with you, the other creatures in this deck aren't here to start swinging. This is not a go wide deck, this is a go big deck. This is basically Voltron with instants and sorceries instead of equipment and auras. It's kind of funky, but this card specifically is so cheap at 2 mana to make Strong an absolute giant that either must be blocked to take damage, or will just kill you. And if he kills you, you're dead. That's how the game works. You only need 21 commander damage to die. Strong will get above 21 super fast, and should be getting to 2-shot range the first turn he's out. Now the land base isn't just 35 copies of Forest, it's 29 copies of Forest, and a Temple of the False God, because it's Temple of the False God, and 2 mana is better than 1 mana, and hopefully you get it later. We've talked about Myriad Landscape before. You sacrifice it to get 2 lands out of your deck, put them onto the battlefield tapped, but it's really good when you have something to play lands from your graveyard, because you can sack it, get 2 lands to hit, then play Myriad Landscape as your land for turn. It still comes in tapped, but then next turn, you can do the same thing again and get 2 lands out of your deck, which means you're more likely to draw heat, and also, you have 2 more lands at the beginning of next turn. It's a fun combo, I really love hitting it. Mariposa Military Base lets you get rad counters if it comes in tapped. You like rad counters. It also lets you pay 5 and tap it to draw a card, but that 5 is reduced by the amount of rad counters you have. So that's probably a free card for you, or a very cheap card for you, very regularly. Finally, Shifting Woodland lets you pay 4 mana to make it a copy of any permanent in a graveyard. I've used this so many times to become a copy of 6 to get Retrace, discarding a land to play 6 from my graveyard, so I have 6. And then next turn you can make it a copy of whatever other permanent you want in your graveyard. It's so good when you're going to be putting so many cards in the bin that you just get advantage on whatever kind of permanent you need out. Sure, it costs 4 mana to do that, but 4 mana isn't all that much. Especially in green. Whoopsie doopsie, my hairstyle changed because I'm recording this later because I forgot to talk about price point. This one actually came in under budget, $96. We saved $4. Does that make up for how much over budget we went on the other decks? Not at all. But with the other decks and with this one, we're also building up a good library of staple pieces. Beast Within, Noxious Revival, there's a ton of stuff in here for milling, and milling is a great strategy. So the fact that we also saved $4 is pretty sick. So that is our strong deck. Do you want to take people to Fight Club? Do you want to mill your whole deck out? If so, build this strong boy. Or maybe you just want to build the Hulk before he costs $70 from a secret lair. Either way, you're set. The background footage for today is from my playthrough of Astrobot. You can go check that out on 2-Lock Time. It should be there soon. I don't think it's up quite yet. We have another Crab's Treasure there, though. We have Kingdom Hearts, and we have Nightmare Card. So you can check out 3 different videos on the channel I put videos on just to have fun. 2-Lock and Mango, we're playing some Elden Ring, still doing that. It's just kind of taking a little bit of a back burner while I work on some of the other channels. We should have our first 5e homebrew video up from the 2nd season of Moria on 2-Lock the Barbarian. So if you're into that, go check that out. And please support me on Patreon. It's the best place to do it. And I'll post the deck list there. I'll also post them in the description of this video, but I'll post them there. And if you join the Patreon, you can play these decks against me by just using the Moxfield link and then playing against me. Bye!